Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining us here today. It is a Sunday morning where we are. Both you, Yuri Castro, and I are talking to you from the United States, and we just want to say welcome. And I'm here to also welcome Yuri Castro back. He returns to our Seeds of Knowledge series with a very, very important topic: when all hope is lost. It marks the beginning of a month that it touches all of us, right? Which is the month known as Yellow September, in memory of all of those who have either considered or been successful in suicidal, right, thoughts, and all of our family members. But with that, I just want to say hello, Yuri. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you, Marcia? Thank you for having me here.
Oh, thank you. But going to you, if this is the first time that you tune in into one of our discussions about Spiritism, just wanted to also introduce Solitude. Solitude Center for Spiritual Living is an organization that is a little bit different than most. We are 100% virtual, and the other aspect that makes it a little bit different as well is the fact that it was founded by members across several continents. The founding members, are found in Brazil, China, Germany, and the US. But not about us. This is about this opportunity to listen Yuri speak to us, and I would love to have him do this. And for those of you who do not know him, Yuri Castro is a spiritist volunteer. He's committed to the dissemination and practice of the spiritual spiritist teachings, and he lives in Florida. He's a member of the Spiritist Center Conscious Living Spiritist Group. It is located North Miami, Florida, and professionally, Yuri is a clinical psychologist. Yuri, thank you so much for being here, and the mic is yours. I'll talk to you back at the end of your talk today.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are and whenever you're watching this. Today, as Marcia said, it marks, the beginning of Suicide Awareness Month. And as such, we wanted to bring something that relates to suicide and with factors that mix psychology. We're going to be talking not specifically about any line of treatment, but more so about protective factors, risk factors, myths about suicide, some ways at looking at this extremely sad act. Um, and also, we're going to be weaving some of the Spiritist teachings. So, we're going to be talking about what happened, what are some of the consequences, and how can we be of help for those who need, or for even ourselves if we need that help. First and foremost, I want to say that suicide prevention is key. There has been an enormous um, task force, I would say, in the last decades in the entire world about preventing people from committing suicide or actually dying by suicide. And one of the things that they do, of course, we have the psychological tools, we have a lot of things like that. But one of the things I wanted to bring to people's attention today is these physical restraints in a way for people who are thinking about dying by suicide. We have the Suicide Deterrent Net that as of January 2024, it's in the Golden State Bridge in San Francisco. That's the image on the left side of the screen. And the one on the right is the Luminous Veil in Toronto's Prince Edward Street. So this here is basically these are two things that can help prevent this ultimate act. And a long-term study found that people who were stopped during a Golden Gate Bridge suicide attempt, found that 90% of them did not go on 10 years later to die by suicide. So not because of the net, obviously, because the net was installed very recently, but if they were stopped either by someone else or by someone talking to them, or physically, restrained or convinced to go back, etc. But that is very important, because then we think about the net and we think about people who attempt suicide, if they are prevented, even though one of the risk factors is previous suicidal behavior, the idea that having something like that can give somebody a second chance. A few common myths that I wanted to help dispel about suicide. One is that it occurs on a whim or without warning. That's definitely not the case. Suicide is inherited or destined. Talking about suicide would plant the idea. This third one here is a very common myth that we, professionals in the field, we encounter, unfortunately, because people believe that talking about it, it's going to plant the idea, it's going to make people more likely to go and try to kill themselves. And the fact is, it does not. That's a myth. Talking about it, it does actually the opposite. Talking about suicide, having an open and honest conversation, normalizing suffering in a way, because we all suffer. It's about, there's different ways we can look at this, but with suicide, it's not about talking about suicide is not gonna plant the idea. There's no relationship between bullying and suicide. There is, but we'll see some risk factors in a little bit. Some people believe that it's just a cry for help. Suicidal behavior. So there's a difference between parasuicidal behavior and suicidal behavior. Suicidal behavior are those who truly attempt to kill themselves. They're not just crying for help. They often report seeing suicide not as the as the easy way out or the easy option, but as the only option. And parasuicidal behavior, we have no like cutting, we have other types of suicidal behavior that they look to be lethal, but that those are more intended as a cry for help, or to relieve emotional pain, or to even feel something for those who are feeling numb. And there's different variations in that. Most people who die by suicide leave a note. That is also a myth. That's something that sticks with us when we look at the news and all of that. That somebody died by suicide and they left a note. Most people don't. Some studies suggest that less than 25% actually leave a note. And most people who die by suicide do not make future plans. That's also not true. A lot of them have made future plans before ending their lives. Some facts about suicide, according to the World Health Organization, is that it has been rising steadily since 2007. Suicide is the third leading cause of death among 15 to 29 years olds. And this is an interesting piece here, because if we think about that age range, when we're coming into adulthood, right? The teenager, 15 and growing older, going through high school or going through all of that, and then up until 29, that's when most people nowadays are starting their career, starting to be like fixed in a career. Those are it's the third leading cause of death among that population. And that raises a lot of question, because in theory, this population, 15 to 29, these are people who are very, mostly healthy. These are people who have their whole lives ahead of them. They have all these dreams, all of that. And then we see that it's the third leading cause between that. More teenagers and young adults die from suicide than from cancer, heart disease, AIDS, birth defect, stroke, pneumonia, influenza, and chronic lung disease combined. Meaning people are dying out of their own volition more so than all of these things combined. And that is scary. Males are 4 times more likely to die by suicide, and females 3 times more likely to attempt, because overall males use more lethal means when they're attempting to end their lives. Therefore, they succeed more often than females. 4 out of 5 teens who attempt suicide had given clear warning signs. So there has been warning signs. But when we look about risk factors, there is no single predictor of suicide. There is no one single thing that alone will lead somebody to end their lives, according to research, according to the World Health Organization as well. The reasons for suicide, the World Health Organization is going to say, are multifaceted, and that's a very good way of describing it because it's influenced by social, cultural, biological, psychological, environmental factors along the lifespan of somebody. So there's no single predictor of that, but there are risk factors that contribute, and when combined together, a lot of them, they create what we call this perfect storm. So I listed a few of them here: alcohol and substance use, accessibility to means, depression and comorbidity, with other disorders, previous suicidal behaviors, history of trauma, adverse experiences, hopelessness, impulsivity, and history of non-suicidal self-injury. All of these combined make it for a very serious case of somebody who might be at serious risk for ending their lives, for dying by suicide. Hopelessness is one, and the title of today's talk is "When All Hope is Lost," because hopelessness is one that is extremely associated with people who die by suicide, especially people with the depressive symptomatology. Hopelessness is a very, very strong factor that will often dictate if somebody is going to attempt to die by suicide or not. There is something that I found interesting and I want to share with everybody is the green lights analogy. This is by these researchers. And basically what they try to convey was that there are as many as 7 different factors that come together in a perfect storm. And it's best to describe these 7 factors as 7 lights on a popular street. To go from thinking about suicide to attempting suicide, all the lights have to turn green in a perfect storm, kind of like the picture that I showed there. So imagine if you're going through that popular street there, one of those lights turn red, you're going to stop, you're not going to continue. But when a lot of these lights, and there may be up to 7 different factors from the ones that we saw in the previous slide that will contribute to that, from thinking about suicide to actually attempting to end their lives. Because we have in our field, we have the differentiation between suicidal ideation, plan, and intent. So there's these levels of suicidality, as we call that, we assess and we try to see if people who are at risk for suicide. There's even this model here. This is Thomas Joiner's model. It's an interesting one as well because it's going to account for, in a simplified way, it's going to account for what would make somebody at risk. And there's this Venn diagram here. And on one side, what he calls desire for suicide is a mixture between this perceived burdensomeness. So from the person, I'm a burden to society, or even I have these burdens that I cannot withstand. I cannot overcome these challenges. And the thwarted belongingness. The thwarted belongingness is exactly what it says when somebody is trying to fit in, somebody's trying to belong, or they don't think like they deserve to be here, deserve to be among their peers, their family members. And there's this, for whatever reason that may be, they feel like they don't belong. So it's a more social, psychological component. And on the other side of the Venn diagram, we have acquire capacity for suicide. So acquire capacity for suicide could be having access to means for killing themselves, but also has to do with mental capacity. For instance, somebody who is extremely, extremely, extremely depressed. So let's give an example of bipolar disorder. Somebody with bipolar disorder, which is a condition that you alternate between, there's the cyclical piece of it by alternating between periods of depression and periods of mania, which is this heightened mood and risky behavior and all of that. A lot of people believe that when those folks are suffering in the deep end of depression, they're gonna attempt to kill themselves, but they usually don't have the energy to do that. They usually don't have the energy to carry out suicidal attempts. So what the risk is when there's this switch between these two cycles, because the depressive cycle can last, or depressive period can last for weeks to months straight, and then like that they switch to mania. which lasts a couple of days. But when they're going back to the depressive episode, that's when the risk is there, because they have the energy, they have the impulsivity, but they're going into the depressive state that they have been before and they don't want to be there again. So they have this acquired capacity and mental capacity for dying by suicide. And then if you have those two things, the desire, which Joyner says is perceived burdensomeness and thwarted belongingness, and the acquired capacity for suicide, there's this Venn diagram, and that person is at high risk for suicide completion or serious attempt. And this is here for folks to see and start to relate this to their lives, or if they have somebody they know is struggling, to start to seeing through these lens and starting to understand, is the person that I'm trying to help going through this, and do they have they acquire capacity for suicide? All of those things that are definitely red flags, so it can potentially help somebody from making the biggest mistakes of their lives here. What are some protective factors then? We talked about risk factors, but what are some things that will help prevent or help, some change somebody's mind and lead them, help them have a more fulfilling life? Family cohesion and stability, good relations with peers, school success. So of course we're talking this school success more about the younger ones. Coping and problem solving skills, which is often acquired through the next piece, which is access to mental health services, which nowadays are more diverse, or they're more widespread than ever. There's even AI now that's helping with that, people to talk to, and sometimes that's gonna go a long way. It's another debate whether that's really effective in a substitute or not. Probably not. But the thing is, there is so much that one can do now to seek for help. Knowing when to seek for help, though, is also a big important factor here, a key factor, because knowing when to seek for help, we can help. We can think of this as both maybe for ourselves or for somebody else, and having an open and honest conversation with them. Because these protective factors, in the end, these conditions or attributes like skills, strengths, resource, support, coping strategies, individual, families, and communities, that is going to help these people find help and not try to carry out this act. Religious involvement is also listed as a protective factor. And since this is a spiritist talk, in the end, we see how this can be very, very important, not only through the knowledge that we acquire through spiritism that we're going to see in a little bit, but also the community behind spiritism, the movement, the spiritist movement, and all of this sense of belongingness. Remember that we saw in the model just a few slides ago, the sense of belongingness. And also lack of access to lethal weapons, regardless of political views or whatever. This is research; it doesn't look at that. Lack of access to lethal weapons is a protective factor for those who, if we're talking about preventing or hopefully helping somebody change their minds and prevent them from carrying out the suicide attempt. I wanted as a side piece, I wanted to put here a few numbers, a few resources for if somebody's watching this and they wanna reach out. They think that they need help after watching this, or they know somebody who might. I wanted to put this here for those who maybe be seeking help like right now. In the US, at least we always say, gotta call 911, call the police so they can take it to a hospital to get evaluated and all of that. And but there's also these text lines, the call center. There's one for LGBTQ. And I wanted to leave that for a couple of seconds if somebody is going to screenshot or take a picture. But there are many others. The idea here is the more we talk about it, the more we spread information, that there is help out there, that suffering can sometimes be too much. And remember the green lights analogy. If we're seeing that somebody's having a lot of those green lights happen in their lives, we want to intervene in an effective way, and through conversation, through open, honest conversations, we break the stigma of suicide talk. Because the stigma of mental health in general, we're talking disorders as well, but specifically suicide, the stigma around that is one of the big factors that people don't seek help because they don't want to feel a certain way because of the stigma. But the more we talk openly about it, we try to help them in an honest way and trying to give them these resources, the more we're going to be effective. And I wanted to shift gears for us to talk more about spiritism. So, what is the spiritist view, and what are some factors associated with the suicide attempt or the consequence of the suicide attempt, reincarnation, and all of that? One of the things that jumps out, and I leave the top right side of the screen, I leave the source for the slide, is the role of materialism. And if we go to the gospel according to Spiritism, we have this passage here that says the dissemination of the materialistic doctrine is the poison which inoculates the idea of suicide into the majority of those who actually come to commit this act. And those who become disciples of such doctrines assume tremendous responsibilities. So they're talking about the dissemination of this materialistic doctrine, which is a strong um, word if we think about it, doctrine, because nowadays a lot of those, if we think of the green lights again, a lot of those green lights and the burdenness and all of that has to do with a materialistic view of things. Like life, we only have one life here, and we only stay here once. And if I lose everything, then I'm worthless, and etc. Just an example, right? But this materialistic side of things, where if I lost everything, or or if I can't achieve what other people are achieving, again, material things, is this poison. Look at what they're saying here, the poison. And those who, you know, have this poison in them assume tremendous responsibilities because, of course, because we're going to be influencing and influenced by this materialistic view. And nowadays, more than ever, we see also the role of the media in fostering this materialistic view of things, and this increased comparison of what I have, what I am physically, or what I have in my bank account, or what I own compared to others. And it's just increasing the comparison, which subsequently increases suffering because we think that everybody else has it better than us. And again, we're talking about these green lights. We don't want to have those lights turn green, and it's definitely not helpful when that happens, but it is the reality of today. If we go to the Psychology of Gratitude, this is a book by Joanna De Angelis, psychographed by Divaldo Franco. She's going to say that the number of suicide in civilized countries is alarming because the culture is materialist with maladjusted populations and based on the firm belief that pleasure is the only reason for meaning of existence. Again, she's also bringing to our attention this trap of the materialistic side of things. And she says alarming in civilized countries because if we think about it, in theory, they have everything. They have means, they have all of that, but still there's this increase in suicide rates and attempts. Although it's worth mentioning that the World Health Organization, they say that 73% of the suicides occur in low to middle income countries, which, as we saw about risk factors a couple of slides ago, makes sense. Another thing she's going to say in the same book here is the loss of existential meaning spreads quickly, and the distraught masses become immediate aggressors, attacking order or allowing themselves to be overcome by discouragement, which leads to depression, to escape through suicide. The discouragement here, we can also swap this word by hopelessness. The one that I said is a strong key factor when we're talking about risk factors for suicide. She's talking about this loss of existential meaning. And this is something that is extremely deep and extremely important for us to look at because it is a risk factor. It is something that it can almost as in a domino effect lead to other issues and other problems. And this is something that can indeed be treated in therapy. So this is something that I wanted to highlight here, that this risk factor is one that we can think about, and there are ways to sort of guided in a different direction. We can also think of the planetary transition too. Again, everything that's happening on our planet, we know through the Spiritist teachings, we're going from trials and atonements, to a world of regeneration. There are a lot of these inconsistencies that people are suffering right now when they're reincarnating here, and a lot of them are shortening their trials or their expiation/atonements. What did the Spiritist book say about that? Question 376: How is it that madness sometimes leads to suicide? And madness, of course, this is back in the middle 1800s, so they were using other terminology than we use today. The spirits are going to say, in such cases, the spirit suffers from the constraint which he feels and from his inability to manifest himself freely, and he therefore seeks death as a means of breaking his chains. So they feel constrained physically, even, because if we think about it, our spirit that inhabits a body, a temporary body, is free. And when we're reincarnated, when we have this material constraint of the flesh, a lot of people suffer from that, and there's this incongruence between what they had and what they have now. Because being here, being alive, those who are incarnated watching this, is not easy. We give up a lot to be here, but we asked to be here, and we can make the best out of our time here. So if we jump to question 948, is suicide as blamable when committed in order to escape the disgrace of having done wrong as when it is prompted by despair? A fault is not effaced by suicide, which, on the contrary, is a second fault added to the first. He who has the courage to do wrong should have the courage to bear the consequences of his wrongdoing. So they're explaining to us here that it is a second fault added to the first. So if somebody made a grave mistake and they go and they want to erase that because they have the materialistic view of, this is it, this is one life, I'm going to end my pain, what they're doing is they're acquiring so much more pain by killing themselves. So they're even saying a second fault is added to that. And then somebody may be asking, but it's my life. Don't I have the right to dispose of it if I want? Let's see. Question 944. Has a man the right to dispose of his life? No. That right belongs to God alone. He who voluntarily commits suicide contravenes the providential ordering which sent him into the earthly life. So this is an interesting piece here, because we talk about free will. We have the free will, which is this instrument that we use for our evolution. We don't have the right to use it to dispose of our life, because that belongs to God alone. We are here for a reason. We chose to be here for a reason. But if we're trying to end that atonement or end that trial that we asked for, we're committing, as we saw in the other slide, an offense. We're committing a fault, a mistake, by ending our life. Only God knows exactly why we're here, and we should do our best to remain here and do the best with our time and this opportunity that we have here. Can we consider as having committed suicide the man who, becoming disheartened in his struggle with adversity, allows himself to die of despair? So this is an interesting one, because can we consider having committed suicide a man who, becoming disheartened in his struggle, allows himself to die of despair? So like those people who become so depressed, they stop caring, they stop doing all of those things that are necessary to maintain this bodily life. The spirits are going to say such self-abandonment is suicide. But those who had caused the crime or might have prevented it would be more to blame for it than the one by whom it had been committed, and the latter would therefore be judged leniently. Same thing when they ask in the follow-up question, is not suicide always voluntary? And the spirits are going to say that the madman who kills himself does not know what he's doing. And if we think about this, we have all of these mental health factors, we have all these spiritual factors that may be in play. past lives that may start to come up to the surface, or past inclinations. And those do affect, they can very much affect the likelihood of somebody trying to kill themselves. There is also the case of obsessions, spiritual obsessions, that is. And one of the books by Yvonne Pereira, which is a medium as well, um, they talk about, it's called Dramas of Obsession. There's this case of obsession in this family that has been lasting for over 400 years. So it was this family, I don't want to spoil for those who want to read it, but it was this family that in the middle of the 1500s, during the I think it was the Portuguese or Spanish Inquisition, they persecuted this Jewish family, and then they ended up torturing them, driving them to insanity, to killing, and all of that themselves. So they become the obsessors, and what happens is, it's this is like in the 1900s, mid 1900s, and the family is still the one that suffer through the hands of the other ones, are obsessing the other family, and they, because of this spiritual obsession, so strong it was, and their links and their chains of hatred towards one another, that they influenced two members of that family in the 1900s. This is 400 years afterwards, because they have not found the forgiveness in their hearts, to die by suicide, and a third one to attempt. So again, this is why we have Spiritism, thankfully. We have this knowledge to teach us, to show us, to warn us that there is sometimes way more than we can see with the eyes. When we look at all those risk factors that we saw a couple of slides before from the psychological part of this presentation, there are so many of those we have no idea how they came about or why they're there. But the thing is, they are there. And this I wanted to bring this case to to warn those, to pray, and we'll get to that, and to be able to make their minds a serene field where only the good seeds can grow. What are the consequences then? And I want to dive too much into that, but just first to talk about the spiritual consequences. In the book Memoirs of a Suicide, it's a very good book that talks exactly what it says. This is we follow Camilo, which is the main character and the person who dictates the book for the mediumship of Rivoni. And we follow these characters there, and as they are recovering the spiritual world after having died by suicide. And it's like, it's him and like I think four others. And as they progress through the book, we see all their plight, all their suffering, and where they went, and the place, the terrible place they were before they got rescued. I don't want to again spoil anybody for those who want to read, because I definitely recommend reading this book. But a couple of things that we can mention here is that there's the consequences, right? There's these two characters. One of them had wealth and intelligence and fame and all of that. He's going to reincarnate once again with all of that, because he needs that trial. He needs to be able to succeed, and he failed before. And the other one, a character named Mario, he is going to reincarnate without his arms, because he used his arms to strangle somebody and then kill himself. So we're talking about the consequences of suicide in different facets and different aspects. Again, I recommend reading the book to know more about it. It's a pretty graphic book. It's not for for those who are not so strong in the stomach, but it's definitely important for us to know and for us to be aware of these things. Question 953 of the Spiritist book says that an expiation proportion to the gravity of the fault according to the circumstances under which it was committed. So that's the consequence according to question 953. An expiation proportion to the gravity of the fault. Just like I gave the example with Mario, who was going to be born without his arms because he used them improperly before. Also, we have on the question 957, what are in general the effects of suicide on the state of the spirit by whom it has been committed? The consequences of suicide vary in different cases, because the penalties it entails are always proportioned to the circumstances, which in each case have led to its commission. Again, the consequences are proportional, but they vary. It's impossible to say exactly what the consequence is going to be to a specific person without knowing their case. The one punishment, this is an interesting piece, though. The one punishment which none can escape who have committed suicide is disappointment. The rest of their punishment depends on circumstances. And again, I want to make a small asterisk here about when they say committed suicide, because we still see, even nowadays, a lot of that expression used in the media. For the past decades, there's been this um, initiative to substitute that vocabulary there, the use of the word committed, because it's often used, there's a lot of stigma around it. We say committed murder, committed adultery. So they're trying to get rid of committed suicide. So if you hear me talking today, I usually try to say die by suicide. That's what they recommend us to say, die by suicide, instead of saying committed suicide. And that helps breaks the stigma, which in turn leads to more people seeking help. But going with what they're saying here, the one punishment nobody can escape that have died by suicide is the disappointment, because a lot of those people who die by suicide, if not all of them, believe that they did it to end the suffering, but they create even more suffering after carry on the act. So, but the rest of their punishment depend on the circumstances. Again, they don't want to be very specific, because you can't be very specific with the consequences, because it's going to vary on uh, person by person. There is also this passage in the psychology of gratitude, where Joanna is talking about this real life story where there was these two boys walking to school. Each were minding their own business. They were classmates, but they never talked. They were just each going in their own world, walking to the school. And then the bag of one of them popped open. And as they were about to cross, after the lights for them to cross went green, they were about to cross, the bag of one of them open up, and all the books and everything, all the materials spread on the ground. And as he was starting to like pick all of that by himself, this other kid comes to him that was walking ahead of him, I guess, and or sorry, behind him, comes to him and starts to help him pick up the materials from the bag. As you know, cars are almost like gonna come and all of that. And he says, I always liked you. You're a nice kid. The kid that's helping the other pick up. The one whose materials got dropped on the floor was very surprised, and then he put everything in his bag and he goes to school, and they start to talk. They even strike a friendship after that. And Joanna said that this story was told by a CEO of a successful company. And he said he was always going to be thankful to that boy, because on that same day, that boy was considering taking his own life. But when the other kid helped him and said that he liked him and he connected with him, then he didn't carry out with the suicide attempt and his suicide plan. Kids. So it does happen. And it is important for us to recognize, again, the risk factors, the red flags, and all of that, and to see how, and I put that there's small things in quotation marks, the small act of kindness by the other boy meant so much that the other kid saved a life, basically. Steered that kid from carrying out the act versus living his life and then becoming a CEO and all of that. Emmanuel says, Emmanuel is another spirit benefactor. He from Chico Xavier. He says that he says, do not disregard the small things you can do for the happiness of others. So I wanted to bring this here to highlight the fact that we don't need to try to be Superman or Superwoman to try and help somebody who's struggling. If we see they're struggling, we can do these small acts. Small to us, they're small, but they may have big consequences to help somebody else. Kevin Hines, who is the author of a book, and actually met him in person, Cracked Not Broken. He He jumped from the Golden State Bridge and trying to kill himself. He didn't die. He got physically extremely bad. You can read that book, Cracked but not broken. He says in the book about the story of this other person that he met that was on their way to the Golden Gate Bridge to jump until somebody stopped them on the bus and said, "Are you okay? Everything all right?" And they started to talk with that person, change their mind, change their mind. Again, the small things, how important one word or one gesture can be. If we go to the gospel according to Spiritism, we're going to see that the Spiritist, however, has various reasons against the idea of suicide. The certainty of a future life in which he knows that his happiness will be in proportion to his misfortunes and the degree of resignation shown while on earth. The certainty that if he abbreviates his life, he will in fact reap the exact opposite of the desired result. This here, I think, summarizes the Spiritist view, I guess, on suicide. The certainty of a future life, the certainty of the immortality of our soul, the certainty that things don't happen by chance and suffering is inevitable when we're in the flesh, when we're in this world that we are in. The certainty of a future life. So I underline certainty, but I bolded this entire sentence there. His happiness will be in proportion to his misfortunes and the degree of resignation shown while on earth, because the idea is for us to remember that we are on earth, but we are not of the earth. We are here. We are in this passage, but this is just a small glimpse in an immortal line that is the true life, the spiritual life. And if we abbreviate something, let's say we chose as a trial or something that we need to endure as atonement or expiation, we're going to be acquiring new debts. We're going to reap what they're saying. We're going to reap the exact opposite of the desired result. For the believer, existence prolongs itself after the so-called death, although in many varied conditions. From this belief stems patience and resignation, which naturally leads all thoughts away from the idea of suicide. This idea of patience or resignation, of trying to withstand and improve and trying to help others and trying to help ourselves overcome challenges. Because again, we cannot have I call it spiritual myopia, of thinking and just seeing just a small period in our spirit's life that we are here right now. We've had other reincarnations. We're going to have many others to come, and we can't abbreviate that needs to be withstood. So the reincarnation, then, one of the pillars of Spiritism. What is the aim of reincarnation? Expiation, progressive improvement of mankind. Without this aim, where would be its justice? So reincarnation, then, this idea of that we are here to expiate, to go through these trials, gives us hope in a sense. It combats the hopelessness piece, because we know that we are here to improve. We know that we are here, and we must cherish this unique gift that we have, because there are so many spirits wanting to reincarnate, wanting to have another go in the flesh, wanting to have another chance to do better. And we have this unique gift, this unique experience, which is our lives. We don't know when we'll ever be surrounded by the people we need to be surrounded by, when we'll ever have everything that we have at our disposal right now. We don't know when those things are going to happen, if they ever happen again. So we need to make the best of that opportunity to endure these expiations and to bring hope for those who experience the abandonment of hope. Joanna De Angelis, she has a good quote in the book Plenitude that I like a lot, or a good explanation of trials and expiation. And she's talking about, while trials constitute a form of reparative suffering, Expiations restore the lost balance, returning the offender to the situation he found himself before the fall. He found himself in before the fall. So the expiation is this restoration of balance. So I was going down a path and I committed, let's say, murder. I deviated from the path of goodness, from everything that Jesus taught, everything that Jesus preached, and I deviated from that. So I'm going to have to expiate that action, that heinous act, to restore the balance that was there. When we abbreviate our lives here, we acquire new depths. That's because we are not restoring the balance. In the other, actually, it's the opposite. We're creating more imbalance. Helping someone can go a long way. And there are many ways to help somebody, talking to them, like I mentioned previous times here today. Talk to them in an open and honest way, in a caring way. Even a stranger, as you see suffering, you can just approach them, because you never know what your words are going to be. If they're coming with this energy of love, with this energy of understanding, they can help somebody a long way. A simple prayer can help someone and ourselves as well. I wanted to make that very clear for everybody, that the power of the prayer, the power of thoughts, of like a heartfelt prayer, can be, it's immeasurable. We don't know, truly don't know the power of a prayer and how much that can help somebody and ourselves. And just by praying to God, praying to the spirits to get help for those who need, or for ourselves, that can go a long way. We have so many invisible friends, invisible benefactors, the discarnate spirits, that are willing and ready to help. All we need to do is truly ask them. In the book Memoirs of Suicide, Yvonne says, Charles said, Camilo says, the human creature will never be so miserable and devoid of sympathies of the invisible plane that he will no longer have a handful of disinterested and loyal friends ready to help the creature in any occasion. Many of these will be affections conquered in the course of previous lives, others missionaries to whom it was entrusted for the work of progress by the supreme power of the universe. So we have friends we acquired in different reincarnations, and we have those who are missionaries who want to help us, to help their progress as well. All we need to do is ask for the spiritual help. And in this matter of spiritism and suicide, I think Emmanuel touches in a good point here in the Way, the Truth, and the Life. This is message 180. When he's talking about shining our light. So he says the anguish of our plane comes from darkness. And this darkness, this collective darkness, and this internal darkness that we carry. Without the shining radiations from our own being, we cannot be seen very easily by the divine messengers who lend aid in the name of the Almighty, nor can we effectively help anyone, whoever that might be. So there's two consequences of not shining our light, letting our light shine as well. We cannot be seen by those who want to help us if we're surrounded and shrouded in darkness, in our own darkness that our mind creates as well. Actually, we're going to attract obsessors doing that. And also, we cannot lend aid in the name of the Almighty. We cannot help anybody who needs by shining our light. We cannot shine the light in our path, in the path of others. So he says it is indispensable to organize our inner sanctuary and illuminate it so that the darkness does not overcome us. Illuminate, he says, is indispensable to organize our inner sanctuary, our heart, our minds, and illuminate it so that darkness does not overcome us, so we don't lose to darkness. Emmanuel also is going to have this message that I did not want to paraphrase. This is the message 124 of the book Living Spring. And I want to dedicate this to everybody who suffered, everybody who has thought about dying by suicide or has attempted and is still suffering. Look at the wording he uses in the message he's gonna give us. It's called "Do Not Become Weary," message 124. It says, when the chisel began to smite the block of raw marble. The stone, in despair, complained against its fate. But later, when it saw that it was admired as one of the most beautiful artistic conceptions in the world, it praised the chisel that had broken it apart. As the caterpillar was moving along with extreme difficulty, it saw the lovely, fragrant flowers and rebelled against its ugly body. One day, however, the viscous body in which it had suffered became an agile, graceful butterfly. Then it praised the ugly body with which nature had prepared for its happy flight. When the red hot iron was put on the anvil, it became frightened and it suffered unwillingly. But when it found itself performing an important function in the machines of progress, it smiled gratefully at the fire that had purified and ennobled it. When the seed was thrown into the dark hole, it wept and despaired and asked why it had been abandoned so utterly. However, when it found itself becoming tall and lush, it moved towards the sun and made itself a respected and benevolent tree, blessing the soil that had isolated it. He finishes off by saying, perseverance is the foundation for victory. Do not forget that in your forming of love and light, you will reap later. So he's basically saying that um, for us to not become weary, for us to persevere, for us to understand, just like the chisel, just like the body of the caterpillar, the red hot iron, the ground, the soil, all those things help us shape who we are in our eternal life. They all help us, and we must persevere when faced with these adversities, with these things that we are now cursing, but that they will lead us to our progress. And to end here, the conclusion, this is from the Spiritist book. Spiritism lead us to consider everything from so elevated a point of view that the importance of terrestrial life is proportionally diminished, and we are less painfully affected by its tribulations. We have consequently more courage under affliction, more moderation in our desires, and also a more rooted repugnance to the idea of shortening our days. Spiritism showing us that suicide always causes the loss of what it was intended to obtain. The loss of what was intended to obtain. So perseverance, patience, hope, belongingness, altruism, charity, praying, those are the indispensable tools that we can use to endure the pains that we're suffering and help others endure themselves. Thank you so much for our time here today. Thank you for your attention, and I wish everybody a blessed week.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Yuri, for a beautiful message. I would like to share that we have put in the chat window several references, not only the books that you mentioned to, but also reference to where you can go if you need help. So with that, I just want to ask you, Yuri, if you could provide us with a message of closure so that we can conclude our lecture today.
Do a prayer?
Yes.
Yes. Let's close our eyes. Let us elevate our thoughts and thank God for the opportunity of being here in this life, reincarnated. Let us thank our spirit benefactors, all of those who are with us all the time, all of those who help us, and all we need to do is ask. Let us open our minds for these teachings. Let us open our hearts for these messages and incorporate them into our own being. So be it.
So be it. Everyone, thank you. Thank you for being with us. And we'll come back later at a different week. Thank you so much, Yuri.
Thank you.